And thank you all so much for listening to another episode of Stuff That Matters. Today we're joined by Ben Ingraham. He's a licensed clinical social worker and trauma specialist, as well as a United States Navy veteran. Ben, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Ben, I'm chomping at the bit to get going on this today. I don't even remember, was it a month ago that the legislative mental health breakfast in
About a
Chapel
month ago.
Hill?
Yes.
I was sitting in the audience and I've gone to that thing most years, right? And those things are fairly stuffy, can be, they can be fairly stuffy, right? There's there's important political figures in the room. There's a lot of people in suits. I was sitting next to some lobbyists who were on their phones watching
Mm.
basketball, right? And that's a true story. And you want to believe that everybody's in that room for the right reason. And you got up and spoke, and I was like, I've got to get in front of this guy. I've got to help this gentleman share the story he just shared in this room, because all I felt and heard was a man just coming from the heart, from a lived experience, someone that is cool to tell their own story, comfortable in their own skin, but not without blemishes and things that we all run into, but not afraid to talk about those things. And you just inspired me, and I wanted to meet you that day, and I wanted to invite you on this because this is what we're all about, is talking to people that can tell their story, and it might shed light on something that others need to hear about. So that's what motivated me to do that. And I'm so happy you've joined us. And with that, can you tell us a little bit about, I know we did the intro. Also, my nephew just graduated from the Great Lakes Naval, forgive me for not getting this right,
That's the
but he
basic
was
training. Yep.
basic training, and he was going to be a Naval Corpsman as well. So
Nice. I'm sure
so
he'll be
there
on
was
his
some,
way to Texas soon then.
he's from Texas, Great Lakes. So anyway, but it's great to have you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, and maybe just what you were sharing, not all of it, but tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah. So I grew up in upstate New York, around Saratoga, a little town just outside of the capital because capital is Albany,
Yep.
about 3 hours from the city. Grew up in a military family.
Mm.
My father, both my uncles, grandparents, and as far back as I think the Civil War we've traced so far has been in some form of service. And so I went to college and I made the decision after college to say I'm going to go join up in the military instead of pursuing a career in finance as my original bachelor's degree. Um, and I picked the Navy because most of my family members, including my father, were Navy. But I know I didn't want to go in a submarine because that's what most of my family members had been on. And
Mhm.
so I was like, what's going to get me as close to the action as possible? And there were a couple of things. I originally signed on in what's called an 800 contract, where that is basically the culminated special warfare groups. You have EOD, SEALs, SWIC, Navy diver, things like that. And they put you in a group in boot camp. You go through boot camp, and then if you make it, you get to go to selection process and things like that. I ended up breaking my lower part of my back, and so I was reclassed. And they sat me in a room, and they're like, "Well, what do you want to be? We have these three options." And corpsman was one of them. And I didn't really do any research. And I was like, I don't know what this is. Like, you get to go with the Marines. And I'm like, let's go, sign me up. And so did that. They flew me down to Texas, where the corpsman school is. It's at Fort Sam Houston,
Mhm.
and did school there. And then after that, went over to Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. I was with First Battalion, 8th Marines for, gosh, a couple of years. Spent some time overseas. Was able to come back and really flourish with my guys. I started kind of stepping into the mental health space a bit with Marines, 18 to 21 years old, and a lot going on, but not a lot of guidance when it comes to practical things and being able to help anywhere I could, outside of a kind of trauma physical space, bullet holes, stab wounds, things like that.
Mhm.
I wanted to do. I had an amazing social worker that helped me through my TBI injury, and
Mhm.
I asked her, what is this job? Like, what do you do? And she's like, I'm a social worker. I'm like, but you don't do therapy. She's like, well, no, I do other things. And so that's when I found out that, you could do whatever you want as a social worker. You didn't just have to do therapy. And that, love was born from there. And so that was 2017. I medically retired from the military in March of 2017 and spent the next 4 years going to school to become a social worker. And I really wanted to have my focus be on the mental health space of active duty military. But unfortunately, that's very hard to do as a civilian, and also not a lot of scientific studies done on that. So it's hard to access that space for obvious reasons.
Uh-huh.
So veterans were obviously the next best step. And so being able to, sorry about that. It's my doctor calling. Let's cancel that. Go. I was concussed the other day, and so I've been to the hospital twice. So
Oh, man.
You playing hockey?
no, I got hit in the head with a lead pipe when I was doing stuff in the garden.
Oh, jeez.
And
Oh.
I ended up spending the night in the hospital, and I've been getting calls for the past week. So I'm glad I could make it today.
Oh, yeah.
So are we. I'm sorry that happened to you.
Oh, it was totally my fault. It was totally my fault. It was some pretty crazy gardening, we'll say that. But where was I? I really latched onto the veterans, and unfortunately, in North Carolina, as an associate, we're not able to take TRICARE as an
Right.
insurance. You have to wait till you're fully licensed, and so that made it particularly difficult. But I still wanted to be in the space, and so I did a lot of pro bono work, and still do, and have really tried to focus more on outreach and kind of word of mouth, like making sure people understand where they can go, making sure people understand that they can talk to someone, um, encouraging other therapists to, do things like sliding scale or other pro bono work, or if they are licensed fully, taking the time to go through the arduous process to become a TRICARE licensed professional. And now that I'm fully licensed, that's my new goal for this year, is to become TRICARE affiliated and kind of start digging in to, both the clients that I have now, and really kind of open up the space to other people that need help, that maybe don't have the access, or in this economy, the money to be able to say, hey, I'm going to spend $100 a week, $150 a week on therapy when I need to buy groceries or gas or something like that. And I know a lot of veterans, especially wounded veterans, live paycheck to paycheck and depend on that VA pay, and I don't want to be the one to take that away from them. So
Yeah.
that's where I am today for the most part.
Okay. Well, so so you've been in North Carolina working since your medical discharge from the Navy, correct?
Yes, that would have been, yeah, March 2017.
And,
I went
and you
to
went back,
school from there, and then
and you went to school from there for like a master's in social work kind of thing?
yes, yeah, I went to a place called Simmons University. That's up in Boston.
Okay.
Hmm.
And in your experience in active duty, you worked with medically traumatized servicemen and women and emotionally behavioral health traumatized servicemen and women. Can you talk a little bit about maybe your experience with the focus and energy that maybe the armed forces puts towards the behavioral or mental health trauma versus the physical? Do you see a gap in those two
Yeah, yeah, no,
areas?
I could definitely speak to that. I would consider it a tremendous gap. And I know the government would like to hide that fact or kind of dismiss that. And I know at the legislative breakfast, we definitely saw a little bit of that with the director of the VA kind of downplaying things, but it's the truth. When I went through, especially as active duty and especially as, pre-deployment happens, because we were still sending guys overseas when I was in, there wasn't a drawdown and they weren't pulling out of anything. Um, if you had mentioned, let's say you're depressed, or maybe you're going through a divorce and things aren't going well, or heaven forbid you have to go on some sort of antidepressant, antipsychotic type medication to make sure you're okay and not suicidal. As soon as the brass, as soon as the military finds out, you're done. They pretty much put you on non-deployable status. You are unable to continue doing that job in that capacity. You will still do that role, so they will just keep you home. And so let's say I was clinically depressed, and I went and told a doctor, who was at the Camp Lejeune hospital, You know, they have all the power to tell my command, this guy needs to be on medication. He's not going to deploy. He's going to stay here and we're going to do whatever. On the physical side, that's pretty streamlined. Whether
Right.
you need surgery for a broken bone or a torn muscle, whether you need physical therapy, they're Johnny on the spot. Like they will do just above anything and everything to get you back to full health, to get you back on the battlefield. I originally broke my leg. I snapped my tibia and fibia on a ruck march to go to a range, and I was back walking in 6 months, you know, which would normally take someone maybe 9 to 12 to recover. Like they were very insistent, and they had some great physical therapists. They were amazing, and they definitely helped me through that. But the mental health side of things was definitely lacking. And I can only speak to my time, which was 2012 to 2017.
Yeah.
After that, I know things have gotten better from my sailors and Marines who I've talked to now. But when I was in, there was definitely a focus on maybe hiding a lot of that. People being afraid, especially Marines, you know, being afraid to say what was really going on, which is a shame, and which is why it really drove me to focus on what can I do to stop that? Because we always emphasize pushing through pain, you know, as the old Marine Corps saying says, pain is weakness leaving the body, right? Which we know now is not quite the case, but
Right.
there is no mental health equivalent to that, you know, because they just kind of beat it out of you, you know, through Marine Corps boot camp, especially through, you know, tough boot camp. I went through a secondary boot camp called Field Medical Training down at Camp Johnson here in North Carolina, and that is basically to get you ready to go with the Marine Battalion or regiment or things like that. Same thing. They don't want someone that's going to feel a certain way when they're at war. They want someone to be able to follow orders and do what's right and continue on. If you have a panic attack, you're a liability. You know,
Right.
if you have a breakdown, someone's going to get killed. Like that's just the reality. And you know, that has really been my focus to help those who have been in those situations, who've broken down, who've had those panic attacks. Heaven forbid, you know, walking in on someone who has got a gun in their mouth or something like that, where it's like, you know, no one knows what's going on. And here's this guy saying, like, I'm at my last straw. You know, this is the only option I have left. And I've lost more service member friends to suicide than I have actual wounds in battle, which I
Right.
think is terrible, you know, at this point in time. And so that's my goal. I want to stop the 22 kill initiative in terms of getting that number from 22 down to zero. You know, I think 22 veterans dying a day from suicide is horrific, you know, and I think that, you know, being able to even reduce that by one a day, you know, two a day, you know, progressively down to zero is a goal, but I just don't think there are enough avenues that do that. I think there are a lot of barriers that at least I have found when I went through the VA process that just slow that you know, process down, and which is what I gave my speech about. There are too many things that will block a veteran or will keep a veteran from either saying the truth, telling the truth, or, you know, heaven forbid he has to hide something because he's worried about getting his benefits taken away or his insurance taken away. And that's a real reality for a lot of vets these days, sadly.
Wow.
So Ben, you know, obviously goes without saying, but we'll say it is, you know, thank you for your service then, thank you for your service now, thank you for all you're doing and, you know, the energy you're putting into trying to make it something better and trying to push in the opposite direction of a system that is big and heavy and tough. So anybody who does that has our, you know, eternal respect because we love that. I'm curious, and I might ask a few questions out of pure ignorance. And so if I get
Oh, yes,
something
please do.
you
Yeah.
know, just smack me because I don't have the same military history or knowledge. And you know, sadly, I mean, less and less people are, right? I mean, I think the percentage of Americans that actually have a family member related to that number, correct me if I'm wrong, keeps decreasing, right? So
Yes.
it's just this smaller, which I'm sure also doesn't help this overall issue, is that it's a more and more isolated, insulated community. Back in the day, you know,
Yes.
everybody had somebody in their family that served, and that's becoming just less and less of a fact. But, and actually, you said that, you know, you were 2012 to 2017. You know, hopefully things have improved a bit in the last 9 years, but that's not that long ago. You know, it's not Vietnam War time. So what I'm hearing you say is this really hasn't evolved that much over the last 30 plus 40 years. I mean, your dad's military compared to your military, when it comes to the culture around mental health sounds like about the same.
Yes. When I talk to my father these days about the Navy and his time, he ended up being a captain. So in '06, he was an officer, and he talked about mental health of his guys, which he definitely cared about, but it was far less of a issue because I think men from that generation, specifically, my father was born in the '50s, you didn't talk about mental health because mental health wasn't a thing really at that
Right.
point.
Right.
And especially in those circles, you sure didn't talk about it,
Right.
because you're perceived as weak. And so when I've asked him prior, I was like, mental health now versus mental health like then, what was the biggest difference? And there wasn't really a avenue to even talk about mental health there. Nowadays, like, you have the chaplain. A chaplain is a great resource to be able to go and say things to. And the chaplain is just like a Catholic priest, unable to say something unless they
Mhm.
are um, bound by, the same thing we're bound by if someone was trying to hurt someone or hurt themselves. It's kept secret. So that is good, so people can, especially Marines will, confide in their chaplain before they'll confide in a doctor, which I get. Um, and there are better avenues.
So they view that actually as a more confidential
Yes.
support
Yes.
than the behavioral health side or the
Oh yeah.
psychiatric side or whatever.
Yeah. Every battalion's got their own chaplain.
Who ends
You
up being the therapist for the group, pretty much.
Yeah, and a lot of chaplains do have, therapy knowledge, and some are therapists. So, like, I know
Sure.
one of the chaplains I met, he had his master's as a clinician, and so he had joined later on in his life, and so he was a great resource to use. But to your point, yes, I don't know, how much things have changed in 10 years, but I'm sure, with the large amount that we've done, I'm sure it's not enough. Um,
Yeah.
I know guys now who are 18, 19, 20 who I talk to getting out, and they're dealing with the same issues. It's just a little bit less of a stigma to talk about them. And they're more apt to say, hey, there's something wrong, and bring it up with the command or someone at the command. And I'm assuming same things happen. I know the non-deployability is still, a risk. You obviously can't have a guy that's suicidal going on a deployment. That's a liability for anybody, including themselves.
Right.
But people don't think about what that does to the person. When
Yeah.
I was medically retired, I was taken from the Marine Corps unit and put on a Navy unit. And I remember I walked into the office of the officer who had never been in the Marines and never done anything. She looked at me and she's like, "You're no longer going to be a corpsman here." And I remember feeling like I died a little bit that day.
Mhm.
It took a huge identity from me away,
Yeah.
and I was never the same after that. And I remember going through PTSD. I remember going through trauma withdrawals, things like that, of just like, what do I do? And I remember talking to my therapist about it then, and I know guys still go through that. They have
Yeah.
a really bad job at transitioning through the military you versus the civilian you. And, there is like you said, a diminishing number of people who understand what that really is.
Right.
And that's half the battle is that transition. So,
Yeah. That reintegration
you know,
process. Um, yeah. Well, I've got a few questions. I'm curious, what is your family? You came from a long line of heroes. I don't think you came from a long line of licensed clinical social workers. It doesn't sound like. What does the family
um,
think about what you're doing with your life and
my
journey?
family is very proud of what I do, specifically due to the connection with the veterans. Um, Most of my family, after they left the military, became accountants and lawyers. My dad became a lawyer. Most of my uncles became accountants. My mother, before she passed, was a doctor, and
Mm,
so she was, on the medical side of things, and she
mm,
worked for Albany Medical, which is a medical school up in New York, around where I used to live. And she worked for the psych department, but she wasn't in a psych related field.
mm.
But I think today she would definitely be proud of what I do. I know I'm trying to be better at being proud myself. It's difficult because I look more at the failures that I have in therapy and the people that get away or the people that end up hurting themselves or worse,
Yeah.
than people that have success stories and come back and email me or call me and say, "Thank you, Ben, you saved me," or like I get far less enjoyment from that just because of the amount of guys and gals that I hear from either me or my people I talk to that, oh, another person wasn't able to make it today. and here we are talking about a funeral or supporting their family through that. And it's just like, what could we have done differently? And that's where I spend a lot of my time thinking about things.
West Virginia, the Mountain State, one of the most majestic places in the country. Breathtaking views, lush forests, serene rivers, and abundant wildlife. Beyond the incredible vistas, West Virginia is also known for our tight-knit communities and loving families. West Virginians are a proud and strong people. West Virginians take care of each other. Sadly, underneath all of this beauty and grandeur lies a crisis that threatens to erode the very backbone of our great state, our families. West Virginia currently leads the nation in the number of youth placed in out-of-state residential treatment programs. Hundreds of youth, hundreds of miles from home, every day disconnected from family, at risk of being lost in the system. It's time we do something about that. With the support and vision of state officials and leadership, New Hope is leaning into this crisis head on. New Hope is bringing our decades of experience in residential care to the Mountain State. 4 new treatment homes will be launched by the end of 2026, which will serve youth who have historically been sent far from home. And hopefully that's just the beginning. It's time we reimagine what residential care can look and feel like in this state. In every community we operate in, we will bring dozens of well-paying careers for passionate and caring therapists, nurses, case managers, and residential care professionals. New Hope won't solve this crisis alone, and it won't be solved overnight. But we can do our part to start turning the tide. West Virginia, a truly majestic place. Our people take care of each other, and they don't back down from a challenge. It's time to bring our kids home.
Do you think, to be very honest, obviously I'm in this space and I knew that mental health and suicide was a factor for our servicemen and women, but I didn't know that stat, right? I didn't know that 22.
Yep. 22 kill initiative is the what the initiative was coined. Yep.
Okay. And it leads me to a little bit back to what you were talking about in terms of avenues, right? There's not a lot of avenues.
Yeah.
Is it money? Is it the stigma? Is it all the above? Is it like, why aren't those, like, I feel like we're talking about it more. The fact that we're talking about it's a good thing.
Yeah.
And you mentioned it's seemingly getting, a little bit better. It seems that way. Can you speak to that a little bit? Is money an issue? I would assume it's part of the equation.
I think it has to be an issue. When I think about defense spending budgets, I remember we had a supply officer who'd always talk to us at the end of the fiscal year. And it was never about the sailors that needed help and that money could have gone to do something. It was about how we can make sure we have the budget for next year. And that's what most places are going to be like. How can we make sure that we have the supplies, not the personnel side of things, unfortunately. And so I think it's really a culmination of a bunch of different things. I think money's a big thing. I hate to say it, but stigma is still a big thing.
Right.
We just redefined, post-traumatic stress from, the 12 other things it's been over the past 100 years. And I'm sure it will change again. Every time it changes and comes back, it's a reiteration of something prior, but there's always something added that's new. And so, it's still a problem. I remember when my dad was going through, he talked about shell shock, and soldier fatigue. And I know he has that. And, I asked him, and he's 72 now. It's like, what would you do if you went and talked to a therapist? It's like, I don't even think I could fathom talking to someone about what I went through. And I'm sure there are many individuals like him that aren't even that old. I'm sure there are Desert Storm vets, Iraq vets that go through that. And I talk to more and more veterans every day that I'm their first therapist they've talked to for whatever reason. maybe it's money, maybe it's stigma. Um, and they're like, wow, I wish I'd done this 20 years ago. And the one thing that I hear the most is, I wish someone had told me about this, because
Right.
oftentimes it's their spouse or a loved one that said, hey, you need to reach out to somebody, and that wasn't their first, oh, I need to do this for myself. So I think for the military, you have to think too, like it's a massive organization. It's a company, if you want to think about it like that. It's a government entity. You have hundreds of thousands of individuals. The Navy, I think, is or was the biggest. I know the Army and the Navy are always, fighting for how big it is, but the Navy especially is massive.
Mhm.
And, the Marine Corps is the detachment part of the Navy, right? That's the boots on the ground part of that, but obviously their own the entity. And, I think it's just an uphill battle, especially when we're in a wartime.
Right.
It doesn't make sense to have a bunch of people in that space, because we're getting ready for war. We're getting ready to deploy. We're not getting ready to go sit and have a group therapy session, as much as I think that would help. Um, I did a master's thesis for my degree on the effects of therapy coming home from a deployment as soon as they got off the battlefield. And I talked to a couple of psychiatrists that did actual therapy with that. And there was a more than 50% reduction in PTSD if, as soon as they left the battlefield and got back to the forward operating base and they were talked to and seen, that their PTSD coming back to the States would have been reduced by almost half. And that's a
Hmm.
staggering number. And my question for that thesis is, why the heck aren't we doing that
What are we doing?
for everyone? Like, is not the amount of money that we spend on veteran benefits, could be taken away, and not in a
Right.
take situation, but we could be saving these people and helping these people if we just had therapists or social workers
Yeah, move that
in
upstream.
place.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's always, I think there's I mean, it's fascinating, and I'm also sure you are pretty unique to your clients, and they don't see a lot of therapists who served, right? I think there's probably a gap there in like
Yeah, there's definitely a gap.
the relatability and the credibility gap of somebody seeing me as a therapist versus seeing you as a therapist. I can relate as a human being, and certainly there's universal truths and connection and stuff, but
Sure.
the experiences that people see obviously in combat are unlike anything else, and it's also a very specific kind of trauma as well. So it's just, there's a little bit of that too, that I'm sure somebody, and I think everybody's brain, especially with depression, I think it's almost the depression tricks you out of getting help, right? It tells you this person's not going to
Our own
understand,
worst enemy.
hang up the phone, and unfortunately, probably for a lot of military folks, they might not be wrong that this person might not truly be able to grasp
Yes.
what you're going through.
Yes, that is a big thing. That is not just military that I talk to about that. I talk to a lot of first responders as well, and that's a very
Yeah.
similar sentiment. Especially police, especially the sentiment around police these days with some people, but it is definitely, I would say, a very similar space, from
Yeah.
deploying overseas to deploying to our streets, to keep people safe.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
You're right. Absolutely.
it's a very tough atmosphere, and as much as I like to help police officers, I don't know what it's like to be a police officer. And the things that I saw are nothing in comparison to what police see nowadays on the streets. And so I try to use my experience, and I think a lot of people are appreciative of that, but I never use it as a talking point and like, I'm going to hold myself on a pedestal. I think
Right.
I try to be as humble as possible, because the space is for them. If they want to bring up
Right.
military history and talk about the military, I'm all for it, because I think the camaraderie it brings to the space is unparalleled. Like, I think that a connection that I can have with a client, if they've been deployed or if they've been in the military, like I have a client now who is a Marine, and as soon as I told him that I was a corpsman, that was it. It's like he started calling the nickname that Marines have for corpsmen is they call us Doc. Like that's what they call us,
Right.
because that's who we are basically. And so the moment that he heard that I was a corpsman, that's the first word out of his mouth, and like it brought me back 10 years ago to that space. And so he and I have been doing a lot of good work. And like many of my other veterans, it's a space where we're looking to see what we can improve on. Can we
Yeah.
do more group work? Can we do outreach? Can we do therapy that's non-conventional?
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
and that's what I think military personnel that are outside need. We are looking into doing super unconventional means of therapy, like not like equine therapy, like things like that, which I think are great, but going out on a farm and doing farm work and just talking about stuff, doing physical things with our hands, doing woodworking, doing things like that where, you can be active, but at the same time, you can just talk about what's going on. And I found that a lot of guys, if I let them do a therapy session and they can be preoccupied, they come out and talk about a lot more stuff than, if I'm just looking at a screen.
Yep.
One of my guys that I talk to, I bring up woodworking because he makes little wooden, I think they're ducks, but they could be chickens, like very, very fine, woodworking small birds. And he says that doing that while he talks about things helps him remember the things he went through because he dissociated so badly from the PTSD and the
Mhm.
trauma. And so having a space like that where, sure, is it conventional to have someone woodworking while they're in therapy? Probably not, but is it going
Whatever
to
it
help
takes.
them be okay? Hey, I'm all for it.
Yeah, most of my best therapy sessions were done on a basketball court with teenagers, right? Because you need
Right.
something, it
Right.
naturally lowers their guard and defenses a little bit because different parts of they don't have as many defense mechanisms that are able to
Right.
happen at the same time, right? Um, Going back to, your master's thesis is interesting because again, I think there's and I almost empathize, and you tell me what you think about this again, because I kind of empathize with, I'm a therapist by heart, and I'm a big heart guy, but I also am like a very practical, pragmatic, realist person, I think. So I kind of get, as an institution, why the military is like dubious of some of this stuff, right? They
Yes.
don't want a softening of our warriors, right? And I kind of
Mhm.
I write that sentence on paper, I kind of get that sentence in a vacuum, that they think this will lead to unintended consequences of everybody's just crying while they
Right.
Right.
so I kind of get the instinct, even if it's like ill-informed. But if the data keeps showing, no, actually, because right now, correct me if I'm wrong, we have a recruitment problem, we have a numbers problem, we clearly have a suicide aftercare problem that certainly doesn't help your recruiting. If
Yes.
I'm looking at my long-term life and saying, okay, what about 22 veterans died? Like, and now I'm going to sign this up and I'm 19.
Right.
So even if you just looked at it purely from like a self-interest, military self-interest standpoint, it feels like that data would eventually be compelling that to have a healthier warrior workforce or whatever. I get why it's not just, hey, do it because it feels good or do it because it's the right thing to do. It's like, no, actually, like this would practically have an ROI for the military.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I just don't understand it. Like that argument at some point has to, and I feel like maybe the argument's been made too much from the heart and not enough from the head, because you could probably make like a financial bottom line argument for this thing.
Oh, hands down. The military came out this year trying to redo how they do veteran benefits at the level of like doing the once a veteran gets out of the military and applies for VA benefits or is getting out, they redid that structure of, okay, what percentages go where? How do we do these percentages? Things like that. If for the thesis' sake, if you were to embed, you know, realistically a social worker for maybe a battalion or something like
Right.
that, which I think you probably need to go bigger just for the scale of things, but just in this argument's sake, and that person was military trained, and had the protection, I mean, it'd make even more sense if they were also in the military. Um, you would be, if the numbers are true, which I believe they are, from the doctors I spoke with, you're reducing PTSD possibly by 50% in every single person that talks to a person and then comes back home. And so if you have 100,000 people coming back home and claiming PTSD over a 50, 60-year period, you're talking about 50,000 of them now maybe not having that.
Right.
And so you're right, from a money standpoint, the government should look into that. But at the same time, from a person standpoint, man, if I could go back, 10 years, 11 years, 12 years and do more about my own mental health, I would do it in a heartbeat. But I just didn't know. The people I went through, it's called TRS, like transition readiness. Basically there was nothing talked about, and it's a week-long course. It's designed for people getting out of the military. Not once was mental health even mentioned, not even the word mental health. We learned how to write checks. We learned how to apply for apartments. We learned how to get a job, but not once did we say, how do we go talk to a therapist? And
Right.
you have to think about the predominant age that these people are probably 22 to 25. So if you left right out of high school, you've got no practical experience on how do I reach out to a therapist? Where do I go to? Who do I talk to?
Where to
And a lot of
start?
these guys may even be afraid to talk to their primary care about it, or maybe they don't even have primary care.
Well, and I think not
So,
including it is kind of also just sending a message too, right? It's sending a
oh,
message
true.
without sending it that like
Yeah,
it's a little bit the unwritten words there are you won't need this, you shouldn't need this. If you
right.
are a true warrior, you probably won't need this. You'll need a job, but you won't need a therapist because if you would have needed a therapist, we probably would have mentioned it. Like
Yeah. And that's
there's some
been a thing
subtext there
forever.
that's not good. Yeah.
Like, I mean, you think about back to World War II and the vets who fought on Iwo Jima and D-Day, and you look at the horrific things that they went through. And I don't want to hear a single person tell me that they don't have, things like that. They just didn't have the space to talk about it. And so you see all those veteran interviews now where these people are talking. You see like the Sean Ryan podcast and things like that. They
Sure.
had a 100-year-old flamethrower from Iwo Jima on, and you hear about him talking about things, and it's just like this is a broken man that if he had been held, and gone to therapy or talked to someone back 60 years ago, I think there'd be a totally different conversation, and those guys are heroes just as much as the guys now are heroes. And,
Right.
all it takes is one conversation. You don't need to have a series of 6 months of therapy. All it takes is one really to feel like you have someone that cares about you, because a lot of these guys may not have that. Going back to talking about the numbers in the military, it's a big problem because there's a lot of sentiment around predatory recruiting in the military where they prey on the poor communities and the poor populations. We give free healthcare, we give free college,
Yeah.
right? The
Yeah.
benefits that we offer. And so, you're going into a community where maybe the average salary is $25,000. Oh, who the heck wouldn't join, right? And
Right.
then you have a totally different demographic of people that are needing to serve, not wanting to serve. And I think that's different, and that makes a whole different population in the military. But I think they're going to have to address it at some point. I think
It's
that,
gonna come. Yeah, it feels like it's heading towards a something that's not good. Because also to your point, even those folks, and not in all cases, I'm making a broad brush, but like just by the nature of potentially growing up in poverty or growing
oh
up
yeah,
in, they already have probably more adverse childhood experiences than the average
Mm.
person. So they're already now predisposed to some
Right.
things, and then we're going to send them into an environment that
yeah.
automatically,
And this younger generation questions things more, whereas my generation and older, you taught not to question things. There's an interview that I saw where they were talking to a Navy SEAL about current Navy SEALs going through training. So 18, 19-year-olds now. And he said one of the, I think one of the most fascinating things that was about that was like they question everything, whereas before you never question anything that anyone tells you, you just do it. And
Yeah.
they will go and ask why. And sure, that may be impractical for the military, but I think that's a good trend in my opinion, because I want to know why. I want to know what's going on. And I think that shows that these young people are a lot stronger than we give them credit for. And I think society kind of puts them down for, is stigmatizing the young people. But, I think it's a generation that will honestly change a lot of what the military is about and has been about. So I think that's a positive thing.
That's awesome. Well, that's a good. I don't think that's a perspective that you hear as much. So anytime people are hopeful about the next generation, I like that, because I think it's easy to be pessimistic. I think.
Sure.
I had one question about something you picked up on, Mike. And sorry, I know you want to jump in. I totally get the incentive structure that exists within active military as to why I would not say that I'm really sad about my uncle dying and I think I need a few days off. Like I get that structure. It's the same, it exists on it's the same thing why a football player is not going to talk about his rolled ankle because he wants to play and he doesn't want to get benched. Like I get all of that. On the VA side, the post side,
yes,
I get the stigma piece still, but you had mentioned like there's still some weird incentives that maybe make it so people don't want to. My brain tells me logically, if I'm on the other side of this thing and I'm getting free healthcare, I want to tell everybody about every ill I have because I want to get it taken care of. So can you get under the hood of that for us?
Yeah. So the VA system as a whole when you get out of the military. There's two separate ways you do that. If you get what happened to me, you get medically retired, which means they do all of that for you while you're still in the military. And then I would say maybe, I don't know, at least 70% of people that get out don't get retired. Maybe I'm sure the number's much higher. They go through the VA process. And so you go talk to maybe a veteran service officer, maybe you go to the VA itself, like up in Durham where ours is. Maybe you reach out to a veteran organization and they may put you in contact with what's I guess a processor, and then you start that journey. So
Mhm.
you go to the doctor and you tell them what ails you. Like you said, everything, as long as it's service connected, that's, kind of the key, as long as it happened while you were in service. And there's
Mhm.
documentation for it. That's where they start. And so they do, gosh, mine was several months. And I know people can be as long because people have obligations and jobs. And so you can't just leave a job to go do it. And so, I would say several months of things, especially the more ailments you have, the more time you're going to be spending. And unfortunately, the way the system is it almost puts you in a place where you have to either embellish what's going on or you have to basically vie for yourself because no one else will. So
Mhm.
if I have a leg injury and I'm walking with a cane, well, maybe this person shows up with crutches, and to make it seem like, okay, this is what's really happening, because the worse off you are, the higher percentage you get. And so, that's why when the government came out earlier this year said, some of the biggest fraud that's happening is with the VA. That's the reality is sailors, soldiers, and people think that they have to do this to get the benefits that they should be getting anyways. And that's
Mhm.
the really difficult piece of, at what point do you say there is a problem with the system and the system has to be fixed, right? If there's a huge fraud system, then sure, fix the system, but how about fixing the people, right? And that's where that kind of, I think, the break happens. My specific interactions with the VA were few and were bad, and so I go use
Mhm.
real, doctors out in town now. I was diagnosed with cancer with no biopsy and no scans outside of an X-ray. And surprise, surprise, didn't have cancer. Um,
Wow.
and so,
They just eyeballed it. They just said,
yep, they eyeballed it.
Yeah.
Literally, they looked at a X-ray I had of my broken leg, and they're like, "Oh, that's a tumor. That's cancer." And I remember it terrified my wife, my whole family, who has a history of dying from cancer, was terrified.
"Oh Lord."
And I was
And
like,
as a
"Okay,
VA doctor, and you're like, I think I'm good here. I'm done.
yes." And so I
Okay.
went to a doctor out in town, and they're like, "It's just a fatty tumor, brother. It's not. You're good." And at that point, it was like, okay, like this was 2018 where that happened. So not, not even a decade ago. And this is at the Durham VA. And so, those barriers that I talked about earlier is you have, I don't want to shame anyone at the VA, but possible just incompetent people, who are not doing things properly. Or a famous word in the military that we used to use is gun decking, which means you're just going through it. So if
Mhm.
you're in a situation where you need to get someone's blood pressure really fast and they're not in extremis, they're fine, you put the thing, you put the headpiece in, you put on the cuff on, boom, boom, boom. You do a little bit of thing, like, okay, 120 over 80, boom, like generic average gun
Just
deck.
getting
Is,
through
is
it.
it right? No, but people do it. And I saw it a lot at the VA, like I get it, I don't want to be here either. And so, unfortunately that affects a lot of people, and if you have a lot of people doing that, whether they're doctors or nurses or CMAs or whomever,
Creates a culture. Yeah.
pharmacists, yeah, I mean it's a culture, it's what it is. And so when the VA director got up on stage at the legislative breakfast and talked about things, I was excited because she talked about all these good things that were happening. And my point in my speech was I did not see any of that. And so I'm glad that
Mhm.
there has been positive progress, but I know because I still talk to these people every single day that come from the VA to come talk to me because they don't want to go to the VA to talk to a
Right.
therapist. It's like, why is that? And most of the stories I hear is like it's just not good to go. Whether it's the care they're getting, the demeanor of the people they talk to. I know one guy who I talk to now is passed around by three therapists at the VA. Don't know why they decided to do that. He didn't. He basically had a one session with each of them, and after the session, they just passed him on to the next person. And I was like, I can't even imagine how that would have felt if that had happened to me. And I know that's happening to more than, obviously just that one person. And so, I don't know if it's a failure at an organizational level. I know there's some amazing VAs around the country, but I also know there are some not so amazing VAs. And so I hope that there is in the future, a higher level, a higher standard of care where we're able to, okay, if the VA in Virginia offers this, why aren't we? What can we do to get to that point? And back to your point, Mike, when you were mentioning money, money is the big issue here. It's how much funding can we get from the government, from the state to do these things, because the veteran population isn't decreasing. The eventually I think it will, with to your point, Matt, with the decrease in recruiting numbers and people. But we have Iraqi, Afghanistan war veterans now getting to this, 35 to 45 range where, okay, they're in the second part of their life and then they'll be retiring, and that population isn't going away anytime soon. And so making sure that those people are, and, to my point, heard, not just seen, like they just need to be heard. And, made to not feel like they're less than, I think is important. That's really where I strive to do things in therapy. For whatever reason, the people I come talk to, they've either been talked down to, told not to say anything, or they feel like they can't. And, how are you supposed to get anything done? How are you supposed to treat what's going on if they don't even feel comfortable telling you hello when they walk in? I had a nonverbal veteran come talk to me once, and he had a hoodie on that said yes or no on each of the sleeves, and he would communicate by putting his hand up because he was too terrified to speak because of how he was treated at the VA. And it took almost 6 months for him to take the hoodie off. Like that was our biggest goal. It was like, once you feel comfortable, you take the hoodie off, we'll have a conversation. And he did. And, I still talk to him to this day, 3 years later. But that really left such a sour taste in my mouth of like, what the heck's going on that this person has gotten to this point, and why hasn't he been talked to or seen to? And if he has, what are they doing? Because it's not working. And so it's very sad. I think that the things that are seen overseas are staggeringly different than what anyone I think could ever experience or would ever want to experience. Everyone's seen a dead body, everyone's gone to a funeral, things like that. It's another thing seeing like a 5-year-old been thrown from a building and then they're just lying dead on the ground. It basically brings you to a point of like, you wonder why these people aren't more, we'll say messed up when they come home. And, I understand why they don't want to get treatment, because these people are tortured souls. These are people that feel like they don't deserve help, or they feel like they don't deserve treatment. And a lot of these guys, they blame themselves for what happened, and which is tragic to me. And it's a never-ending struggle. Like I said, the 22 Kill Initiative has been something that, is a huge organization now. When I was younger, it was much smaller, but it's still called 22 Kill. They haven't, unfortunately, done nearly enough to lower that number. And, that's really the sad fact that in, almost 20 plus years now, that number stayed the same.
Did the same.
And, the reasons why may be different from war to war, but trauma is trauma regardless of how you got it. I have plenty of people who've been in the military who never deployed and were sexually assaulted, and they have their own PTSD, and that's a whole nother topic for how the military treats sexual assault people. But
absolutely.
it's difficult, and, to your point, Matt, of like, how do we, resonate with these people? I don't think a veteran needs to talk to a veteran to be able to communicate. I just think you need to level with them, and I think the unconventional nature for therapy, I think really should be looked at more, maybe expanded upon, because that's how you level with these guys. If I'm being honest, if I'm going to go talk to a therapist, and I talk to a therapist now, and I look for someone with practical experience. That was my goal, to find a therapist who's not 21, fresh out of college, looking for therapy.
Live some life. Live some life.
Yeah. And I think that's what a lot of veterans want. They want someone who is not going to judge them. Unfortunately, I've had veterans come in and tell me that they were called murderers by therapists, and like that's a great interaction to have. And unfortunately, a lot of people are left with decisions where it's either them or the person that they're shooting their rifles at. And
Yeah,
It's a
of course.
decision you never want to be in.
Yeah.
But that's the decision that they have to make. And so, being in the space to help, I think that as long as you put yourself in a position to maybe advertise, because I look on people's profiles all the time, and veteran is one of the last things ever mentioned. Whereas if you look at someone like my profile, that's the first thing I mentioned myself, that I'm a veteran. And so I think that's where people really, whether they see your business card or whether they see your interaction, like they want to see that you're a person. And so that's why my profile pictures me with a big moose. I'm not in here sitting with a suit. That's who you see right now is who I am. I'm an avid hunter. I'm an avid gunsmith. I'm a veteran. Like, I enjoy doing things outside. And I think that's why a lot of those people gravitate towards me, because that's what veterans do. I think a lot of veterans nowadays, if you do a lot of the video game stuff, I think you'd actually be pretty successful with a lot of the younger veterans, because they like that. Believe it or not, not a lot of young veterans like Call of Duty. A lot of young veterans like things like Minecraft and games that are maybe not educational, but like tactile, where you can do things, build things, and be creative. You'd be surprised how many people that I talked to liked cartoons and played Minecraft and weren't the stereotypical Call of Duty guys from where my time. And so, I think playing to that, and I've looked into that. I've looked into doing something like a Minecraft server where we could have guys come in and we just talk about stuff, things that might be a little impractical because I have no clue how to do any of that tech stuff. But, being able to have a space like that where, maybe after therapy, the server stays on. And so, okay, you have now essentially a group of guys who gravitate towards each other, who can maybe become friends.
Well, it's the same function as the woodworking, right? It just is, it's on screen. But it serves the exact same purpose. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So like, I think those are avenues where I think that it would benefit this field to go into and look more into. D&D is becoming huge again, thank goodness. I grew up playing D&D, but I had a professor from Old Dominion reach out to me the other day doing a survey on D&D and the mental health field and like the practical aspects of that. And man, it wasn't as big when I was in, but I know afterwards, especially with the Stranger Things effect, everybody's into D&D in the military now. And so running a D&D game where you can explore yourself, have an imagination and maybe be a person you're too afraid to show on the outside, but this character, maybe an imagination of you, it's just a character. And so, allowing this space, but maybe not letting, like what you talked about, the basketball with your younger clients. They don't really know it's therapy. It's just them having fun, but they're still able to have fun and talk about things, and you're able to get what you need from them, in a way that's productive and fun.
Right. That's awesome. Great perspective. I love it. Love every second of it. Honestly, as a therapist, I love it. Love it, love it, love it.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Matt from New Hope, COO. Hope everybody's doing great out there. I don't do a lot of these video talk to phone things because I'm awkward and they're a little awkward sometimes. But I think the last time I did one, we had a big announcement that we were expanding into the state of West Virginia. So I did think, given what I want to share today, that it might be fitting to go ahead and try one. So New Hope is thrilled to be announcing that we are officially expanding into the great state of Tennessee. We are going to be bringing 2 new adolescent treatment programs to Tennessee, hopefully on the outskirts of Nashville, which is an amazing city, to serve some of their youth that right now are unfortunately being served hundreds of miles away from home. Tennessee, like other states, are struggling with that kind of top 1% of high acuity, high risk, high complexity youth. And those are the youth that New Hope wants to lean into. So we are thrilled. The partners that we are working with from the department just could not be better. They are fully aligned with our vision and our values of what good looks like for these kids and how we can do things differently. So we are beyond pumped. We've been talking about this for almost a year and a half, so I'm thrilled to finally announce it. There is a job posting that is live right now for a program director. So if you know somebody in the greater Nashville area or who wants to relocate to the greater Nashville area, please look into that and hit us up because we want to find an absolute rock star leader to help bring this project to life. So stay tuned. The next 6 to 12 months are going to be super exciting as we find properties, hire staff, probably about 50 people in general will be joining the New Hope Tennessee team. And it's just awesome to even say New Hope Tennessee. So let's go.
Ben, just curious. I mean, I know you mentioned you don't have to necessarily be a veteran in order to relate to, those that you're speaking with in your therapy sessions, but that lived experience, I mean, you can't match that. You can't mimic that. So how much has it aided you being able to relate to people that you speak with when they come to you for guidance, even if it's just, finding a common ground, D&D, things of those nature, not judging people hard. Like when you mentioned the one therapist that called someone a murderer, man, that's terrible. That's criminal behavior, honestly. So
Yeah.
your lived experience, how much has it benefited you in your post discharge career?
I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it's benefited me tremendously. Through my time, even in my degree, I worked with a lot of people that, would look to me as a mentor in the space, and I am by no means a mentor. I'm just some guy. I just try to be honest and I try to help people wherever I can and wherever I go. I was raised to do that, and so I didn't need the social work field to teach me how to do that. I had the basic groundworks. Um, I just had to get to that point where I could do it professionally and then get paid to do it, which is
Right.
also really nice. But yeah, the lived experiences. Actually, one of my first clients I ever met was that. He and I guess, had been in the military at the same point and been at the same base, but just didn't know each other. And there is a ton of that where Marines from Camp Lejeune. I have, gosh, I think I have around 42 clients now. Probably half are military, and I would say probably half of those are combat vets,
Mhm.
and half are not. And I would say the lived experience is definitely there because they're like, what is it like to have PTSD? Because not every veteran has PTSD. I
Hmm.
think that's a common myth. Like I said, you don't need to be a veteran to have PTSD.
Right.
Um, but unfortunately, that is a big thing. I would say the VA probably siphons through more anxiety and depression at this point than PTSD. But it makes it just easier in the first session. When you start asking the questions that are, always hard to ask, when you start talking about family and the past, and eventually you get to the topic of, oh, you served, right? It
Right.
makes it a lot easier to then say, I was right there with you. I've been there,
Yeah.
done that. Like it is a much more practical introduction. And I think it lets people let their guard down a little bit faster. And there are definitely still some people that are very judgy. There are definitely a lot of veterans that think if you haven't been in a combat deployment, you're not really a veteran. And, I think that's BS.
Right.
I know plenty of people who didn't deploy who were amazing, military members.
Hmm.
I can name five or six off the bat right now, that I think were exemplary leaders and
Oh, yeah.
people who guided me through my whole medical career.
Those are
Um,
probably people who just aren't yet ready to engage in the process,
yes,
and they're looking for
yes,
any their
you are
brain is
correct.
looking for any reason not to,
Yes. Yeah.
um,
And so, it's one thing to, be in that space, but to have been able to go overseas and, do just, you know, I guess experience some things that, maybe normal people wouldn't experience, I think really helps the perspective, but I don't think that's the whole piece of the pie. That's a piece of the pie. It's not
right,
the whole pie itself. Um, and I really try to catapult anything that I do in those first couple of sessions into, any space that I can get them into, right? My goal isn't to say, okay, you're coming in to treat PTSD. We're going to lock in on this for the next six
Right.
sessions. Like, that's never my goal. My goal is always whatever you feel comfortable with sharing, we'll talk about it. If you want to talk about the weather one day because you've had a really crappy day, hey, I'll talk about the rain all day. I'm a big weather guy. I watch the Weather Channel every single day. If you want to talk about sports, we'll talk about sports. If you want to talk about your time in Afghanistan where you saw, six kids get blown up and, the suicide bomber could have been stopped, but command said no because that happened. One of my clients was in the pullout of Afghanistan and saw the suicide bomber in the
mhm,
vest coming up to the front.
That point.
Um, and went through that lived experience. If you We'll talk about that. I will never know what it's like to be near or around a suicide bombing, but I
right,
know what it's like to unfortunately bear witness to the aftermath. And seeing mass casualty of any kind is terrifying. But seeing children used as essentially bait by the Taliban, is something you never unsee. And, I would say, the predominant symptom that I run into with clients is nightmares. Nightmares are like the biggest thing that I see with my clients as far as stuff that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. And again, going back to the VA, I don't know if there's a medical correlation to this, but a lot of my guys suffer from sleep apnea. And in the limited time that I have looked up things, a decrease in sleep. So, if sleep apnea is, not helping you sleep as much, that can increase things like nightmares and things like that. And so, again, going back to more care for the veterans and doing a little bit deeper digging into maybe if we just spend a little bit extra on this or that, maybe we could get these guys and gals some more help. But again, you're fighting, like you said, at the early on stage there. We're fighting a system that's too big to fail, and I'm just one person, and this person is just one person. It's very tough to breach the barrier, so to speak.
I'm sure there's a lot of symptomology, if I'm saying that word correctly, with substance use disorder and
Yes.
veterans who self-medicate, and
Oh
maybe
yeah.
instead of getting to the trauma, or maybe focusing rather on the behavior rather than what's underlying
Yeah,
the
I've definitely seen an
Focus on
increase
the coping
in,
skills.
yeah.
yeah, like definitely an increase in THC use in veterans. I know it's being studied in North Carolina, and I know it was on the docket at one point for medicinal use. And from the studies that I've seen from the veterans in Virginia, where they did a study recently, there was a lot of improvement when it came to not just mental health, but just overall life improvements. And so, um, when a veteran comes to me and they're like, "Yeah, I've been using alcohol as a tool," I'm like, "Okay, like I get it, but I was there. I'm a former alcoholic. I'm a former addict myself. I get it. I abused pain medication after I left the military. I abused alcohol. I was there. I totally understand that. But maybe we can find something that helps you that's legal, like alcohol is, but does something different, and doesn't put you in a way where, hey, I'm going to go drive and now you got a DUI or you've hurt someone." And so a lot of the guys that I talk to are getting into the THC space with like the gummies. Like that's a big thing that I hear people talk about. And the biggest thing I hear outside of it helps with my PTSD and anxiety is it helps with my pain. I don't have to take the VA's pain medicine they give me. I can take this. And anybody who's been in narcotics knows once you start going on narcotics, that's a damn sure a very hard road to come back from, especially with some of the levels of narcotics that they have. And we're talking some guys maybe missing a limb or two, and you're going to get something like, hey, we're going to give you morphine, instead of maybe like a tramadol or a hydrocodone. The higher you go up that schedule, the more likely, you're having some ramifications and side effects. So again, like them, I would much rather say, hey, I'm going to take a CBD gummy
Right.
Yep.
instead of taking a medication that's going to constipate me. It might make me depressed. It might make me susceptible to fits of anger,
Yep.
maybe some fits of rage, like all of these things that veterans already have a hard time going with without medication. And so doing some things, and I think the VA would be, and I hope North Carolina ends up passing it, but alternative ways to do medication, I think is very good. Like I know ketamine has been a big thing nowadays, and I would really encourage veterans to look into that space because I think ketamine has been doing wonderful work with veterans for the ones that can afford it. Because I don't think TRICARE covers ketamine as much as it should, but that's another thing. Like I know what Patrick and I were talking about before, the hyperbaric chamber stuff. The
Okay,
oxygen.
I was gonna. Yeah, we jumped on late. I was gonna ask and get your opinion on that because
Yes, like things like that, like any sort of alternative treatment that doesn't require somebody to go on SSRIs and pain medication. I'm calling that a win.
Let's look into it.
Even if
Yeah,
it's a little bit of a decrease in symptomology, it's better than nothing.
yeah. Nothing's magic, but we got to follow the data. And if some of the
Right.
stuff, if some of these results are in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80%
Yep.
without a lot of side effects, what the heck are we doing? What the
Right,
heck are we
right.
doing? So,
I know there's, obviously people have, moral arguments when it comes to things like THC, but like at the same time, do you want to win your moral argument or do you want these 10,000 veterans to not have pain at the end of the day, right? Like it's a government thing, and that's as Mike said, it is a stuffy room to be in when you talk about those things, but I think it's a room worth fighting for, for
yeah.
sure. Not just veterans, it's anybody going through that.
My mother had a leg amputation, and went to a marijuana THC kind of protocol that was very helpful. She was embarrassed to tell me. And I said, it was a hard thing for her to tell me. I said, Mom, I was in tears. She had pain relief. I was like, I'm so happy for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. If that room took some gummies, they'd be less stuffy too, I think.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not promoting we're not endorsing. It's just a fact. So.
We could probably continue this conversation for hours, if not days. Unfortunately, until that 22 number goes down, that these are conversations that need to continue to happen and won't be ending anytime soon, unfortunately. But this has been incredibly enlightening for all of us, I'm sure. So Ben, I gave you this question before we started recording. So final one for you. And again, you've been doing this certainly throughout the course of this interview, but for you, what is the stuff that matters?
Veteran care, access for care or access to care for veterans and just being able to be heard and seen. I know it sounds simple. I know it sounds easy, but we're not doing a good enough job. And so being able to give these guys and these gals the space to talk, the room to grow, and the kind of arena to fight the battles they need to fight, I think is a win in my book. And so I hope that these next couple of years, these next couple of decades that we have, I hope we see some significant improvement, and I hope that number goes down. I hope we can get in our lifetimes at 22, maybe down to a 15, maybe down to a 10. I know it's maybe impractical at times, but we owe it to them. We owe it to these guys and gals that are, putting their lives on the line.
Ben, can't thank you enough for your time, the words you've shared, the information, the stories, the passion, the compassion for who you are, really. And it's just been our pleasure to host you today. And
thank you.
This is, I think, maybe the beginning. I know that when this gets turned off, I want to share a couple names with you of folks I know in our area that are similar in their scope and what they do for work. And I think networking with them would be great. So just a big, huge thank you from Patrick, Matt, and I, and Stuff That Matters.
Well, thank you. Yeah, anytime you talk and have me back, I'd be glad to come back and give you anything y'all need.
We probably will take you up on that. I think there's a part 2 for sure. Yeah. Thank you. Like Mike said, and I just hope I really would love to see more active duty folks view this as a career path for them, right? To go from warrior to healer is a great path. And an important path. And so the more that you can keep amplifying, I think you're obviously going to help your clients, but I think you have an ability to influence future movements like that. And that'd be really special. So thank you, man.
It's a great path, and it does not make you weak to do it. I think that's the big takeaway. You're not a weak person because you're doing it. You are stronger than most people. So
no, you could beat us all up, and you got 30 guns behind you. I wouldn't want to mess with you at all, man. You're tough. You're tough as nails, but I would love to have you as a therapist. So yeah, you can do both at the same time.
Unless you're doing gardening work, then you don't stand a chance.
Yeah, can't do gardening work.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Ben. Thank you,
sir.